Watching. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the watching section of Power Up. I'm Trisha Hirschberger, joined by Maude, Garrett, and today we're going to be talking about what we're watching.
Yeah, this can be movies, this can be a show that we're binging, this can be anything that doesn't require leaving the house at the moment. To kick things off, though, I'd like to bring in Amy Cassandra Martinez from Geek Bomb, who's going to be telling us not only some news, but showing us her wonderful face. Hi, Amy.
All the way down. Hello. Hi.
What's new?
What is new? This movie, maybe it'll come out, maybe it won't. Talking about the New Mutants. Yes, this is the 5th release date that this title has had in 2 whole years. So now it is set for August 28th. Deadline reports that Disney still intends on releasing this Fox acquisition theatrically, rather than on their streaming service, which I think is very interesting.
Wow.
Yes. Will it happen? Won't it happen? I really don't know at this point. And the fact that they still want to do it theatrically, really?
It's hard because at least here in Los Angeles County and in California, they're talking about reopening things in phases. And at least from everything I've read, places where you sit and gather all as a crowd in one place for long periods of time are like the last thing that's going to open. Movie theaters, concert venues, like that's going to be the last thing that we get.
Mm-hmm. Just put it on Disney Plus and call it a day.
Just get it out there.
I feel like Disney's in a unique position for that too, because a lot of other major studios don't necessarily have their own streaming platform. Disney already has their own streaming platform, so it really makes sense.
Yeah, and I just feel like stop delaying sort of like the life force of this property. Like, stop playing with emotions. Just get it done and let's celebrate it. If you haven't heard of the New Mutants, this is a property that is supposed to be very, very X-Men based, but instead of it being like a superhero genre, they've switched the genre to horror. They finished filming this about 2 or 3 years ago. I joked that everyone in this photo is now 30. Some people got the jokes, some people didn't, but you know what, that's fine. But the cast is really, really cool. You got Maisie Williams, who we all know as Arya from Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. There is Anna Taylor-Joy, who has been in a bunch of movies, who's basically someone that you need to have on your radar ASAP. I first saw her in, what was the James McAvoy, M. Night Shyamalan, starts with S.
Signs.
Nope.
No.
Split.
Thank you. Yep. Split. Bonus points for Hector. Split. That's where I first saw her. She's just been in a new movie called Emma. I think she was working on something with Edgar Wright, which probably was so top secret and I wasn't allowed to say that. And I only just remembered after I said it. So enjoy it.
Wolfmeister in chat says a theatrical release is probably an easier way for them to track genuine consumer interest than releasing it as just another title on a content-bloated streaming service.
That's
interesting opinion. I don't know. I feel like there are not many new films currently released on streaming services, which is in part why I would say Trolls World Tour did so well. Just to test this theory, go on your streaming service of choice right now and look at what new movies you can buy. It's slim pickings.
Hector, voice of God, are you interested in seeing New Mutants at all? I'm so curious about your genre.
Yes, and I think at this point I'd wait. I want to see it in theaters because I feel so bad that it has been delayed that if it were to drop on Hulu or Disney Plus or whatever, I would watch it, but at this point I'm in it for the long haul. I want to wait for a theater.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're going to be two ways. You're either going to be so sympathetic towards it because it's just a wounded deer at this point, or you're going to be like, no, you actually think I still care? Yeah, good luck. So that'll be really interesting. But thank you so much, Amy, for the news.
Thank you,
and
Amy,
Bombs Away
for
segment
the
with
news.
watching.
And everyone in chat is saying that was the voice of Zelda, which I highly doubt.
Definitely. It sounds like a Hispanic man, yes.
Mom, let's go on a walk. Mom.
Zelda!
Well, that lovely voice that you've been hearing will be joining us in just a bit, where you will actually be able to see his beautiful face as well. But we'll be back.
I think it would be an absolute waste to not ask Hector about New Mutants. But what are you watching at the moment, Shish?
So this is funny because I started watching Extraction because my husbando was like, I heard this was good and it looks like something I'd like. Let's watch it. And I did not put two and two together that you talked about this on last week's Power Up. It didn't, like, I remember you talking about a movie on last week's Power Up, and I actually watched this and I did not put two and two together that they were the same movie. So
what did you think of it?
I'll be very short about Extraction since we already talked about it. But it was fine. I think it was trying to be much more of a thriller a la Taken than it was. Yeah. It was just okay. I wanted it to be more. But I mean, the performances were fine. I didn't find myself really caring about the characters.
The story didn't have substance at all, but it was just a massive flex to showcase that the director used to be a stunt coordinator. Like, he was a stuntman.
Yeah, and the stunt choreo was amazing.
Exactly. And this is what we saw with John Wick. So the stunt choreographers for Matrix moved on to be directors for John Wick. And that series has gone so well. I think this is kind of like the Russo brothers' version of a John Wick using, Thor himself. I loved that he was Australian in this and that they kind of like doubled down on his Australianism by using or by having fellow actors who were Indigenous, and Indigenous actors just so rarely get on screen time. And that meant a lot to me as an Australian.
Yes.
But also I'm pretty sure he ad-libbed some Australian slang, and there was a moment where he's trying to reverse the truck, and I do apologize because I am about to swear, but he's reversing the truck and he's like, oh, fuck's sake. And I was like, for fuck's sake is one of the best Australian colloquial terms out there.
Wait, is that an Australian colloquial term?
For fuck's sake?
I've heard that in America since I was a wee human.
Well, it's like the way, I guess it's like yours is for fuck's sake. But in Australia, it's like, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's East Coast, maybe more prevalent on the East Coast. I mean, I grew up in Philly, and it was definitely not a dainty for F's sake.
Yeah,
it was definitely like an angry, exasperated for F's sake.
Yes.
But maybe, but the other thing that I've been watching since we really talked about Extraction last time is the 1977 Hobbit film, because I introduced my tiny human to Tolkien for the first time, and this is how I decided to do it. So even though we have a little Hobbit graphic novel for him, I thought that the animated 77 film would be the best way to do it. He's into animated films right now. It's not too long. It's not too scary. I mean, especially in comparison to a lot of the Disney films that he's been watching on Disney Plus lately. Like, there's scary stuff in all of them. And I watched it with him, and I answered any questions he had. And, when there were moments where he was, like, a little terrified, we just cuddled up. But he's really into it. And so now he has, like, a little fake sword that he carries around that he says he's going to sting you with it because the sword is sting. Yep. It's super cute. And that Blu-ray of that film was also my Mother's Day present this year for my husband. And he was like, it's so that we can introduce Logan to the Tolkienverse. Really, so that's what I've been watching lately, because he's 3. So once he watches something once, he then has to watch it about 6 million more times. So I have seen that Hobbit animated film at least half a dozen times already this week.
Well, I watched it for the first time a couple of weeks ago because that was my watching for last week also for book club. And
what?
Hector and I did a live tweet, for this movie. It was the first time I'd ever seen it. The Hobbit is a musical. Try to convince me otherwise. And the animation style for me was a little much. Did he get scared of the spiders? Because that spider is whack. Like, that is scary.
He's very fixated on the goblins. The goblins are scary.
Oh.
Okay. And the spiders, I think the spiders aren't so scary because Bilbo doesn't seem super scared of them. Bilbo's like, and I will sting you, but Bilbo's scared and they're all trying to get away from the goblins. He also thinks Gollum's a little terrifying, and Smaug is very scary, but I think he also really likes Smaug because Bilbo talks to him for a while. And my other favorite thing is, for a while he thought Bilbo's name was Pablo. It was like, it was so
I'd watch
cute,
that.
and I was very into it.
I'd watch Pablo going through Middle Earth.
Maude, what are you watching?
Avatar: The Last Airbender. This is one of my favorite animated series of all time. it came out in Australia on Nickelodeon when I was hosting Nickelodeon in Australia. So have you got the giggles over Pablo? Sorry. And for me, like, I had to watch a lot of SpongeBob and a lot of all of those shows, but Avatar: The Last Airbender was my favorite show instantly, and it was something that I loved being able to explore with the audience and kids of Australia, and we would bond over it together. But it is such an amazing series, and it's coming out on Netflix, so we can all stream it together. I covered it on Quibi before it came out, so I had to subscribe to a Nickelodeon subscription service. But if you've never seen this, it's so amazing, because it looks anime, and it's about a mythological Eastern culture. And they make this series with so much love, and there is such a depth of kindness in this show. But it's basically focusing on 4 nations that represent an element, so air, earth, water, and fire. And there are particular benders within each of these nations that can manipulate that element. Unfortunately, for airbenders, they've all been wiped out bar one, who happens to be the Avatar, the entity that can manipulate all 4 of the elements. And so it's all about Aang's journey, and it's so delightful and wonderful, and it teaches without like forcing. It just happens so effortlessly, and it nurtures such a strong rapport that it's such a breathtaking show. If you need something for Logan as well.
Do you think it's age appropriate for a 3-year-old?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there are times where the Fire Nation goes to war, but it's never really like brutal. Yeah.
Catnip Ninja highlighted message in chat says, "Man, Avatar is such a good series. Shame it never got a movie."
Nope, never got a movie. What a shame. Gosh, it would have been good if someone had actually made that. Well, there you go. So that is my reading. But it is time for watching. That was our watching. So it's time for
our watching. It's time for Bombs Away Q&A with Amy.
Hello. Yes,
I'm
back. So this first question is from a bomberbacker from our Patreon, patreon.com/geekbomb. I will also be getting one from you guys watching right now on Twitch. So this one's from Seb_X. Is there a favorite project you produced or was in that was completed but never released? What was it and what happened?
Oh,
that you
my
can
favorite
share.
thing that I worked on was Fountains and Flagons. Something that I worked on that was never released.
I definitely have a lot of those, because the year that I left SourceFed for The Escapist, I was under a development contract with Defy Media, and all I was doing was developing new shows.
Technically, same. I left SourceFed so I could work for Defy on a show that never ended up happening. And so when I left, I was like, to pursue a dream gig. And this job was supposed to be a really cool thing. But then it kept evolving, and then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, we're not going to do it. And I was like, whatever, you gave me a deal memo, and it got me out of, being sponsored by SourceFed, and I got to have another visa, and I can freelance again. So thank you.
Yeah, one of the shows that I made this is probably my favorite thing that I've ever made that never saw the light of day. And it was with Pat Kildane, if anyone remembers Pat Kildane from Mad TV. He plays a lot of celebrity D&D nowadays. But Pat and I co-produced and made this show that I think at the time the title of it was Hero Metrics. The working title was Hero Metrics. And it was basically, how were we pitching it at the time? It was Mythbusters, but for fandom. So it was kind of like Kyle's Because Science, except for instead of just informational, it was more hands-on and like actual experimentation. And the pilot that we filmed had to do with mithril armor and the cave troll. And we were asking that, yes, the mithril armor might stop the piercing damage, but wouldn't a hobbit-sized rib cage be crushed by the sheer force of the cave troll if you're looking at just the movie? So we rented out a huge stage in the YouTube space and set up a battering ram and did all of these physics calculations to figure out what the blunt force impact would be given a cave troll of that size, using like screenshots from the film and all sorts of stuff, and then bought a crash test dummy that was a child size to represent the hobbit stature. And like this was intense. Wow. We did the whole thing, and I won't tell you what our experimentation results were. But so this was a whole pilot that we put together, and I was really happy with it, and Escapist was really happy with it, and they were like, this is the show that's going to bring us back. And then the execs at Defy, and I can talk about them now because they're bankrupt and well known how crappy they all are, they took my show and were like, this looks really good. Thank you, Trisha. And then as I kept saying, hey, what's going on with Herometrics? They were like, oh, we're good, we'll let you know. Here I come to find out they start casting hosts for Herometrics because friends of mine are called in to audition for it. And they're like, Herometrics, isn't that your show? And I was like, yes. So I marched into said executive's office and said, I'm sorry, if you're going to add a third host to the show or replace one of the hosts on my show, given that it is my show and I own it and retain IP to it according to my contract, you need to consult with me before making creative decisions of that nature. And they lost their mind because they were like, you do not own IP. And I was like, reread the contract. You gave me jerks. And I had my lawyer call their lawyers, and it was a big old fatty thing. And what ended up happening was I retained rights to Herometrics. Pat and I did. And Defy was like, well, that's okay because Screen Junkies just pitched us something really similar. So we're just going to go with that. And I was like, after you've all seen my pilot.
Oh.
So that's that story. That's my story of like the thing that I was the proudest that I worked on, that I really wanted to do. And this was years and years ago. And so now, the reason that I wouldn't pitch it now is because I feel like between game theorists and Because Science, they cover that realm really well. But in the year that I was pitching this, it hadn't been covered very well. Like it was being covered specifically for movies, but not kind of all fandom culture of like tabletop and video games and movies and a smattering of all of that. But I really loved the concept of that show. And years later, I did approach Pat and I was like, hey, do you want to like try to make another go of this? And he was so burnt by the whole situation. He was like, it's just done. Just let it lie. Because he was so salty about the whole thing.
That's so sad.
Yeah, screw Defy. But I'm not the first person to say screw Defy, so that's old news.
Well, I'm pretty sure Defy got pretty damn screwed all on their own.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I don't get one from me, a couple from me as well. Yeah. There we go. Cool, we got it done. Amy, did you have a question from the Twitch chat?
I do. STS2884 asks, what show do you regret? Marriage. What show do you regret watching after it ended?
Did I regret watching after it ended?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Game of Thrones.
Regret watching the whole show or just regret watching it through to the end?
I regret watching the last episode because I was championing Game of Thrones until just after the Night
bells.
King was destroyed by Arya. And then the 2 episodes after that, I wish I never saw.
Oh, I 100% regret watching the last season of Game of Thrones. I wish I could take it all back.
I cried so hard, Trisha. I was in London doing a junket and I was frantically trying to find a link or somehow to watch this show. I ended up watching it on my iPhone.
Wow.
Yeah, it was the most miserable thing ever. But then afterwards, I was so let down and so upset because I honestly, I was still championing it like 2 episodes before where I was like, you just don't know. It's not over yet. And when that happened, I just felt so empty. I sobbed. Like it was those heaving into a pillow for about an hour. I was so upset.
Yeah.
Answer. Good question, though. That is wrapped up with watching with PWR. Amy, thank you so much for dropping those bombs for Bums Away. And don't forget, ask your questions in the chat or submit them through the Patreon. It is coming up. We're going to do some reading with Hector Navarro. But before we get to that, we've got some shout outs to make. Thank you so much for watching. Guys, stick around.